Daniel chapter 6. That's back in the white pages. And it's right after Ezekiel. I know you've been reading in Ezekiel lately, so you'll be able to just flip on over to Daniel chapter 6. And Bob almost had you play Here Kitty Kitty, because this is a part where it has Daniel in the lion's den, but we'll get there in a minute. And we're looking at integrity. Semper Fi, you will know, is a statement that you would hear from a Marine. And it's the motto of the United States Marine Corps, and they live and die by that. And Marines are dedicate to their lives to honor and country, and they also dedicate, they never leave one behind. That they're faithful in that area. And they stand at attention in their dress blues, white gloves, and gleaming swords, and they proudly display the excellence not only of their ranks, but of their commitment as well. But in 1987, however, 2 Marine guards at the U.S. Embassy in Moscow threw mud on that brass button image. In exchange for sexual favors, they allowed Soviet spies to rummage through secret papers, which included military plans, transmission codes, and names of undercover agents. These young Marines knew the ethical standard. It had been drilled into them for years, yet for a fleeting moment of passion, they eagerly traded it in along with their own integrity. Their lapse of character illustrates a broader shift of values in our society. Self-fulfillment has become the highest good, not honor or honesty. And we have men in all offices and women that have lost their integrity. According to Charles Colson, who's now with the Lord, he wrote this from C.S. Lewis. He argued in 1943 that mere knowledge of right and wrong is powerless against a person's appetites. Rather, reason must rule the appetites by means of a spiritual element, that is, loyalty to a transcended good higher than oneself. Otherwise, he's saying without God's help, integrity goes out the door. That's what he's saying. As soldiers of the cross, our loyalty to Christ and his standards should also be nothing less than semper fi, always faithful. God holds us to a level of integrity. But how many in our ranks have we seen seduced into society's bed of moral compromise? And it's amazing today, folks, the compromise in the church in America. And I use that umbrella lightly when I say the church in America. Our plea is for Christian men and women to treasure and incarnate godly character, which is included in that word, integrity. Integrity. As we'll see, Daniel was a man of integrity. I shared a little on Wednesday night, and we'll get there in a moment, but he was a politician. Just remember, Daniel was a politician. And politician, integrity, that's almost an oxymoron today. So anyhow, and there are some good ones out there. When I use that, I don't want to say that everybody's immoral and everybody's blah, 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 but finding those without skeletons in the closet. Integrity, what does that word mean? It means that adherence to a code of especially moral or artistic values, incorruptibility, unimpaired conditions, soundness, quality or state of being complete or undivided, completeness. The Hebrew counterpart word is Tom, T-O-M. That's this young man's name over here that I called Jim. But I guess it was just because we have so many Jims that anyhow, I'll find some excuse. The psalmist used this word to refer to King David. And I won't have you turn there, but in Psalm 78, verse 72, it says this, "And David shepherded them with integrity of heart, with skillful hands, he led them. That word there again, completeness, soundness. If he made a promise, guess what? He kept it. That's a person of integrity. If he began a job, what? He finished it. That's a person of integrity. With David as the leader, the nation felt secure. But remember this, integrity doesn't imply perfection. David wasn't sinless. He wasn't perfect, right? We know that. As they are in the light, though, they are in the dark. They are not manipulative or self-aggrandizing, and they have nothing to hide because they're not worried about it because they're a person of what? Integrity. You know how it is. Telling lies is hard to keep up with because you can't remember what lie you told what person. And so you got to keep on trying to, but see, a person of integrity doesn't worry. They told you the same thing over here, they're going to tell you the same thing over here, right? And David was that kind of man. Integrity is having the guts to tell the truth even though it may cost you. It's finding the courage to follow the true path though others are cutting corners. That's integrity. You may have to endure laughter, embarrassment, or injury for what's right. And we've had so many men and women of God throughout history who have been burned at the stake, who have been fed to the animals, and to all these things that happened to them because they stood up what? For the truth. People mocked them. Just think of Noah. For 120 years, people were making fun of him because they had never seen rain before. And he said, you better get ready because the flood's coming. And he was a preacher that was mocked and made fun of. It's sticking with your beliefs, even if it means being thrown into a lion's den. And that's what we're going to look at here in Daniel. A man of integrity who first faced the lion's den was, of course, Daniel. And, of course, a lot of times we don't get Daniel so much as a story unless we were in children's church. But hopefully you have. Dr. Jeremiah has a wonderful series on Daniel. Daniel is an exiled Jew. And I have on your outline, he gets a deserved promotion. And he's living in the city of Babylon. And remember, Babylon's famous king is Nebuchadnezzar. But Nebuchadnezzar has now been demoted and the Persians have taken over, the Medes and the Persians, and they have a new king, and his name was Darius or Darius. Depends on who. When I used to watch VeggieTales, it was Darius. But I haven't watched VeggieTales in a little while since my VeggieTale kids are grown up. But, you know, I still have that thing in my, oh, where is my hairbrush? And I've seemed to have misplaced it. And anyhow, that was on VeggieTales. If you didn't watch that, was with Bob the tomato and Larry the cucumber. So, and they didn't need a hairbrush so much. So anyhow, as myself. And Darius is now king, chapter 5, verse 31, and he's reorganizing the government of his realm, and he immediately notices someone stands out, and his name is Daniel. His name is Daniel. And Daniel is probably in his 80s at this time. He's not a young man. He's been around for a while. And God has used him mightily. And in verses 1 through 3, it pleased Darius to set over the kingdom 120 satraps, or if you have a King James that says princes, to be over the whole kingdom. So he's setting up men over different provinces so that they can make sure that things are business is taken care of, kind of like we have what? Representatives and senators, that kind of thing. And then to be over the whole kingdom, and over these 3 governors, of whom Daniel was one, that the satraps might give account to them so that the king would suffer no loss. So there's 3 men looking over the 120 to make the 3 men make sure the 120 aren't crooks, right? And so this is all government. This is politicians here, folks, we're talking about. Then this Daniel distinguished himself above the governors. So when he looked out, he said, man, that Daniel, there's something about him. There's something about him. And satraps, because an excellent spirit was in him. And we know who that spirit is, right? The Holy Spirit of God working there. And the king gave thought to setting him over the whole realm. He said, I think I'll make Daniel prime minister. Well, these other 2 guys are not so fond of that idea. and as you see as we go along, look pretty bright for Daniel, but paradoxically, Daniel's success couldn't have made his life tougher. Because as he's moving up on the ladder, there's some people not so happy about that. Many of us assume that adversity is the greatest test of our integrity. When money's tight, people try to figure out ways maybe to get extra money in non-moral fashion. Work is unrewarding. Life is a matter of holding on for better days. It seems that finding relief through moral compromise would entice anyone. But I believe a greater test of character is prosperity. As you study the Old Testament, you'll see that Israel wandered away from God when they were what? Prosperous and doing good. I think that's, as a nation, we've done the same thing. I think we've had some reminders. 911 was a reminder. I think the storms, the fires, those kind of things, and the hurricanes, the tornadoes, the reminders that we need who? We need God. We need God. And but when people are doing good, a Scottish essayist named Thomas Carlyle said, adversity is sometimes hard upon a man, but for one man who can stand prosperity, there are 100 that will stand adversity. Otherwise, he's saying the odds are, if you're in bad shape, 100 to 1 that you'll do better than a guy who's doing well. And whereas adversity simplifies life into basics. You need to worry about food, clothing, and housing, right? When there's no money there. And you can see where someone who has no food, they might think about how to obtain that food? To steal it. That's understandable, right? So that temptation's there. But those who are wealthy, doing prosperous, when your salary increases, so do your perks. And so do temptations, right? And the security you hope to gain by making it to the top quickly fades. And remember this, only the Lord and your integrity will preserve you. Daniel found this to be true because he's going to get some undeserved afflictions here as we move on to verse 4. So the governors and satraps sought to find some charge against Daniel concerning the kingdom. And I have this yellowed in my Bible because remember, he is a politician. But they could find no charge or fault because he was faithful, nor was there any error or fault found in him. They did everything, folks. They checked all of his old records. They checked all of his files. They listened to him. They snuck up and followed around him, and they could find what? Silcho. Nothing. Man, I don't know if there's a politician alive today that they could do that on. Especially for someone who's been around for 80 years. And someone who's been in leadership for all that time. With Daniel, Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego as you go through this book of Daniel. And so they can't find anything. Daniel's life is clean. From his business dealings to his bank accounts to his closed door meetings. Did Daniel know they were investigating him? I don't know. You think he cared? No. When you're living your life above board, you don't care. You don't care if you're peeking in my window. He doesn't care. He doesn't care. Eliphaz, in the book of Job, chapter 4, verse 6, says, "Is not your fear of God your confidence? And the integrity of your ways your hope?" And his enemies couldn't find anything wrong there. And then verse 5, it reads, they figure out an area to entrap him. Verse 5, "Then these men said, we shall not find any charge against this Daniel unless we find it against him concerning" what? The law of God. Well, Daniel wasn't really worried about that either, because he is walking in the fear of the Lord. He's walking the way the Lord would have him do. So in verses 6 through 9, they come up with a plan. And you know the story. So these governors and satraps thronged before the king and said thus to him, "King Darius, live forever." So, yeah, building him up a little bit, kind of like Keith was doing to you, Rhonda. Building him up. And no, that was mean. Sorry, Keith. But these guys are building the king up. Long live the king! Man, he's all right. And then they make this little statement, and I circled it in verse 7. All the governors of the kingdom. Lie. That's a lie. All is not all unless it means what? All. The administrators and satraps, the counselors and advisors have consulted together to establish a royal statute and to make a firm decree that whoever petitions any god, small g, or man for 30 days, except you, O king, shall be cast into the den of lions. Now, O king, establish the decree and sign the writing, so that it cannot be changed according to the law of the Medes and Persians, which does not alter. Therefore, King Darius signed the written decree. So they said, hey, no one can pray to anybody but you for what? 30 days. All the men came up with this. Well, I don't think they even consulted all the men. I think these few guys got together and they come up with a plan, because they'd watched Daniel, as we'll see in a minute. Every day Daniel did something 3 times. Opened his window, got on his knees, and prayed. They saw him do it every day. They said, man, right here, we got him. We're going to use something, and so we're going to make a law against his Christian activities. And folks, we're getting a lot of that happening in the United States of America today. They're making laws against Christian activities. People are being put in jail. Canada, this guy's put in jail for just preaching the gospel. And they're going to do that to all of us at some time or another as history goes on, because I know that from the Bible. And it's going to happen, and it's happening here in our country. And the penalty for praying to God is what? Death in the lion's den. Death in the lion's den. So somewhere along the line, King Darius and Daniel have a close relationship. He knows Daniel real well. And you're going to find out in this next reaction, is his reaction. You see that he knew Daniel. And he knew something about Daniel's God. Because another thing you want to dig up sometime, Isaiah said that Darius would become king way before Darius was even a picture in this world. And God had already planned this all out, folks, because God's going to use Darius in some mighty ways. Now, verse 10, now when Daniel knew that the writing was signed, somewhere they come on and they told him, hey man, you can't pray to anybody but to the king. And he said when that was signed, he went home, and in his upper room with his windows open toward Jerusalem, he knelt down on his knees 3 times that day and prayed and gave thanks. So you might think, man, he's just being kind of nasty about this. No, but you got to read the rest of the verse, right? Make sure you read the rest of the verse. As was his custom since early days. He's been getting on his knees, looking towards Jerusalem and praying every day, ever since he's been young. Ever since he's been young. And you can bet these guys are what? They're watching him. Because they knew he did it, what? Every day. That's what he did. And so these men assembled and found Daniel praying and making supplication before his God. And they went before the king. And these guys said, man, we got you. We got you. They're confident. You can see, it's just like those junkies we have on TV now. They get fixed on destroying someone's character, right? And these guys said, man, we got him. We want him out of the picture, and we're going to do whatever it takes. And that's what these guys, then these men assembled and found Daniel praying and making supplication for his God. And they went before the king and spoke concerning the king's decree. Have you not signed a decree that every man who petitions any god or man within 30 days, except you, O king, shall be cast into the den of lions? The king answered and said, the thing is true. According to the law of the Medes and Persians, which what? Does not alter. There's nothing that the king can do, and you're going to find there's nothing he can do to change this law. He signed it into law. And now he's sorry that he signed it. And the king, when he heard these words, was greatly... Excuse me, I missed a verse. So they answered and said before the king that Daniel, who is one of the captives from Judah, they make sure they got the right Daniel here, does not show due regard for you, O king, or for the decree that you have signed, but makes his petition 3 times a day. And the king, when he heard these words, was greatly displeased with himself. He said, man, how did I get myself in this position? When they came and they lied to him, he bought the lie that everyone was in on this, but Daniel was not. And somehow in that relationship, because it looked like that relationship's pretty close with him and the king, and that the king said, he's thinking, man, I should have talked to Daniel before I signed that stupid paper. And anyhow, that's where he's at. You all been there before, haven't you? Yeah, did something that you wish you hadn't done, said something you wish you hadn't said, signed a paper maybe you shouldn't have signed, but you're still married. And the king, when he heard these words, was greatly displeased with himself and set his heart on Daniel to deliver him, and he labored till the going down of the sun to deliver him. Man, this guy stayed up all night. Said, there's got to be a way to get Daniel out of this. Somehow, all the way to the evening, he says, man, I got to figure out a way. This is just not right. There we go. Then these men approached the king and said to the king, now, know, O king, that it is the law. This is the law of the Medes and the Persians, that no decree or statute which the king established may be changed. So the king is in a dilemma. But he still knows Daniel well enough to know something that's coming up in that next verse as we see God's divine protection. Daniel was God's man, and he was there at that moment. So the king gave the command, and they brought Daniel and cast him into the den of lions. And that word den means in a hole under the ground. So down there in this pit, they've got lions starving them, waiting to throw somebody in. And so these aren't kitties or kittens, even though that sounds cute. Here, kitty, kitty. But anyhow, these are wild animals, and they're hungry. And and I told you I'm a but man. I like the word but in the scriptures, and this is in italic, so it's been added. But the king spoke, saying to Daniel, your God, whom you serve continually, he will deliver you. Now, how did he know that? How did he know anything about Daniel's God? Daniel must have told him. He's watched Daniel's life. He says, man, this guy's God is something else. And I have confidence that he'll what? He'll deliver you. He will. Daniel doesn't say anything. Isn't that something? He's not sitting there fighting for his rights or whatever. He's there. Then a stone was brought and laid on the mouth of the den. And the king sealed it with his own signet ring and with the signets of the Lord's, that the purpose concerning Daniel might not be changed. Otherwise, they all put a signet ring in there, and all these guys to make sure this rock doesn't come off until they say it comes off, right? So Daniel's in a predicament. He's down there with the lions, and this is not a new story. Now the king went to his palace and spent the night fasting. Isn't that interesting? He's fasting. He's worried about who? Daniel. And he's fasting, and no musicians were brought in before him. Otherwise, he's awake. He's laying there with insomnia. He can't go to sleep. He's fasting. He's praying. He's worrying. And also his sleep went from him. Had a few of those nights. Usually it's because I've had too much caffeine. But sometimes it's not. And sometimes it's just the Lord keep me awake to do what? To pray for people. I tell Darrell Brown he's the worst problem that I have in my life because he keeps me up more than anybody else. Because I wake up so often praying for Darrell. Man, if you take time, pray for Darrell Brown. Whenever I see him, I'm amazed because I think he should be with the Lord. Because I think he's not coming out of the lion's den. And he's just been through so much. And so whenever and then I go through the list. Now, God's easy on me because our list here is not super long. But I pray for everyone sitting here at least one time. And I pray for family members, and I pray for our country, and I pray for those things until finally, embarrassingly, I fall asleep. You know, so I try to use that time wisely. And so he's up all night. Then the king arose very early in the morning. Well, as soon as it's daybreak, guess who's out of bed? Hadn't slept all night. He's concerned, and went in haste to the den of lions. So I say it that guess what? He was going there high speed. He wasn't just, oh, well, I'll get there in a minute kind of stuff. This guy was going to see what had happened. He's got to see what's going on with Daniel. And when he came to the den, he cried out with a lamenting voice to Daniel. He's crying out like maybe Daniel's gone. He's just weeping. I think part of that is because he feels bad because guess who signed that paper? The king did. And now his maybe most trusted advisor is dead down there in the lion's den. And the king spoke, saying to Daniel, Daniel, servant of the living God. Daniel had told him a lot about God. He said he's a living God. He said he's a faithful God. and has whom you serve continually. So he saw this as a pattern in Daniel's life, that Daniel was a man who served God, who had a person of what? Integrity. And been able to deliver, whom you serve, been able to deliver you from the lions. So somewhere along the line they moved the rock, folks. I don't know when, it doesn't say when, but probably before he shouted down there. Then Daniel said to the king, O king, live forever. My God, and I circled my in my Bible, because see, that's what God does for his children, right? He does things that men just can't believe happen. And that's the kind of God he is. My God sent his angel and shut the lion's mouth, so that they have not hurt me, because I was found innocent before him. Well, not only was Daniel innocent in man's eyes, he was what? Innocent in God's eyes. And that's why he was innocent in man's eyes, because he kept his life in account with God. Doesn't say Daniel was perfect. I'm telling you, he was a man of integrity. I'm sure he had shortcomings because he's made of the same mud that you and I are. And I found for him, and also, O king, I have done no wrong before you. And so he wants the king to know it. Now the king was exceedingly glad. Can you see him? He's shouting. He's shouting, and he's excited. Daniel's all right. And commanded that they should take Daniel up out of the den. See, up out of that hole, out of that pit. So Daniel was taken up out of the den, and no injury whatever was found on him. Now, I kind of wonder when they threw him down there, if they just let him down or did they just throw him down in a hole? But no matter what, there was no hurt on him. Because, and here's the because, and I yelled this in my Bible, because he believed in his God. The NIV says he trusted in his God. He believed, he trusted. Daniel was confident that God would deal with the situation. Just right, even at Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego, as they were getting ready to throw into the fiery furnace, they were confident that God would do something. And now, what God's going to do, we don't know, right? But God was going to do something, and he was confident. And so, we see that even though Daniel was a man of integrity, guess what? Some trials came his way. And I'm going to tell you what, today, in today's world, when you stand up for what's right, you will have opposition.
That's right.
When I make statements such as homosexual remarks, I believe the LGBTQIA group is way off wall. They don't believe it's not right. That doesn't go over so well with some folks. My buddy asked me, my buddy Burge, and there ain't nobody like Burge in the whole world, but he's my best buddy. I just love the guy. And he asked me, he said, if you would go to jail for preaching against gays, would you still preach? And I said, as long as the word says it's wrong, I'll still keep on preaching, right? I can't help that. That's what God said. You take it up with him. And I've said it before. I didn't write the rules. I didn't write the book. I just read them just as we just did. And our time is up here, so we're going to... But I just want to read one part to you to let you know how hungry those lions were. And the king gave the command, and they brought those men who had accused Daniel, and they cast them into the den of lions. Not just the men, listen to this, their children and their wives, and the lions overpowered them and broke all their bones in pieces before they ever came to the bottom of the den. Those were hungry lions. Some folks say there could have been up to 200 people cast into that den. And whatever it was, they didn't make it to the ground. 3 principles, just give you. First, true integrity implies that you do what is right when no one is looking or when everyone else is compromising. True integrity implies that you do what is right when no one is looking or when everyone else is compromising. That doesn't work. Everybody else is doing it, right? That doesn't work. Number 2, real integrity stays in place whether the test is adversity or prosperity. Otherwise, when you're doing good or when you're doing not so good. Third, broken integrity means that the spiritual leader forfeits the right to lead as he or she once did. If I fall into a moral compromise, if my wife hasn't killed me yet, I have no longer any reason to be in front of this group and behind this pulpit, right? I forfeited that. Now I'm going to tell you, there is forgiveness for those folks, but the ability to be in a leadership position is forfeited. And in the political realm, you can do it if they've broken certain laws or whatever, things like that. They forfeited their right to be a leader. And even though we don't adhere to much of that in the political field, but in the spiritual field, we need to make sure we do that. And God would hold us accountable to do that. Remember, it's Semper Fi, Semper Fi.